Eleanor Morgan stood frozen in the doorway of her grandfather's garage. The musty scent of aged oil, dust, and memories enveloped her like an old familiar blanket. Her trembling fingers clutched the antique key that had rested in Thomas Morgan's desk drawer for decades, a key she never knew existed until now. Before her, two massive shapes lurked beneath weathered canvas covers, their silhouettes mysterious and imposing in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. As dust particles danced in the air around her, Eleanor wondered why her grandfather had kept these secrets locked away for so many years, and why, of all people, he had trusted only her with the truth. The house smelled of faded memories and pine-scented cleaner, the same brand Thomas had used for over 40 years. Eleanor had scrubbed the kitchen counters raw that morning, a futile attempt to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering to darker places. 2 weeks had passed since she had watched her grandfather's chest rise and fall for the final time, his weathered hand growing cold within her grasp. The hospice nurse had said it was peaceful, but what did peace look like in the face of so much unspoken history? At 42, Eleanor had built a modest life for herself in Millfield, Massachusetts. The small town's local nursing home had been her workplace for 15 years, where she tended to the elderly with a gentle patience that earned her respect but never wealth. Her one-bedroom apartment above the town's bookstore was comfortable enough, adorned with second-hand furniture and the few cherished items she'd collected over the years. The walls were decorated with framed photographs, most featuring her and Thomas during happier times. Unlike her brother Robert, Eleanor had never left Millfield. She'd had her chance once. A prestigious nursing program at Boston University had accepted her with a partial scholarship. But that was the same year her mother's multiple sclerosis had worsened dramatically. Eleanor stayed, choosing family over ambition, while Robert departed for New York, his accounting degree opening doors that Eleanor could only glimpse through. "You're throwing away your future," Robert had told her the day he left. "Mom wouldn't want you sacrificing everything." But sacrifice didn't feel like the right word to Eleanor. Every time Thomas had visited her mother, bringing home-cooked meals and sitting patiently while she struggled through their conversations, Eleanor understood what real love looked like. It wasn't measured in diplomas or promotions or the sleek Lexus that Robert now drove. "The real measure of a person isn't what they own," Thomas had told her one evening as they sat on his porch swing. "It's what they give away." Now she wandered through his home, touching the worn spines of engineering books on dusty shelves, running her fingers over the arm of his favorite recliner, where the fabric had thinned from years of use. The two-story wooden house at the end of Maple Street had been built in the late 1960s, its bones solid despite the dated wallpaper and creaking floorboards. The backyard stretched toward a line of oak trees, the detached garage standing like a sentinel at the property's edge. Thomas had always been a private man, quiet about his past and guarded about certain spaces within his home. The garage, especially, had remained off-limits as long as Eleanor could remember. "That's my private workshop," he'd say whenever she'd ask to see inside. "Some places a man needs to keep for himself." Eleanor's earliest memory of the garage dated back to when she was just 8 years old. She'd been riding her bicycle when the chain slipped off. Thomas had taken her hand and led her to the garage door, unlocking it just wide enough for them to slip through before closing it firmly behind them. "This is our secret," he'd said, his voice low and serious as he guided her to a workbench. "I don't bring people in here." The memory sharpened as she stood in his kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows that needed washing. Thomas fixing her bicycle, his hands steady and sure, explaining each step as though she were an apprentice rather than a child. The tools lined up with precision, the strange, large shapes in the back covered with canvas tarps that she'd been curious about, but forbidden to approach. "What's under there, Grandpa?" she'd asked. His face had softened then, eyes drifting to the covered forms with something like longing. "Just old projects, things from another time." Eleanor was pulled from her reverie by the harsh ring of her cell phone. Robert's name flashed on the screen. She let it ring 4 times before answering. "I've spoken with the bank," Robert said without greeting. "The house has a second mortgage that's 3 months behind. Did you know about this?" Eleanor leaned against the kitchen counter. "No, he never mentioned money problems." "Of course not." Robert's sigh carried the weight of old frustrations. "Eleanor, we need to be practical. The funeral wiped out what little savings he had. The house needs to be sold to cover his debts. He only died 2 weeks ago, Robert. And the bank doesn't care. They want their money. I'm bringing my lawyer tomorrow to assess the property and start the inventory." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. "Can't we at least take some time to go through his things properly? There might be—" "There's nothing of value there," Robert interrupted. "Dad lived like a hermit. The sooner we liquidate everything, the sooner we can move on." After the call ended, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, head in her hands. Her brother had always been practical to the point of coldness. Their father's death 7 years earlier had only widened the gap between them, with Robert focusing on the financial aspects while Eleanor handled the emotional aftermath. Now history was repeating itself, but this time with the man who had been more of a father to her than her own. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the house as Eleanor made her way to Thomas's study. The small room off the main hallway had been his sanctuary, walls lined with bookshelves housing engineering texts and automotive magazines dating back to the 1960s. His desk, a solid oak piece that had belonged to his father, dominated the room. Eleanor sat in his chair, running her hands along the worn edges of the desk. The leather seat still held the impression of his body, as if at any moment he might return. She began opening drawers, searching for anything that might help her understand the financial situation Robert had described. The bottom right drawer stuck slightly. Eleanor tugged harder, and it opened with a jerk. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, several folders of papers, and a small wooden box tucked against the back. She reached for the box first, its surface smooth from years of handling. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was an antique brass key in a sealed envelope with her name written in Thomas's precise handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I've gone to join your grandmother. There are things I never told you, things I never told anyone in our family. The key enclosed opens the padlocks to the garage. What you'll find there will explain everything. In the safe behind my workshop poster, combination 546871, you'll find all the documentation you need. Don't share this with Robert until you understand the full story. Not because I don't trust him, but because he doesn't understand value the way you do. You were always the one who saw me, really saw me, when everyone else looked past. For that alone, you deserve the truth. With all my love. Grandpa." Eleanor stared at the letter, reading it 3 times before its implications began to sink in. As she set it down, her eye caught a glimpse of red paper in the drawer, a notice from First National Bank. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she read the formal language. Final notice of foreclosure. The house was scheduled for auction in 30 days unless the outstanding debt of $68,000 was paid in full. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Thomas had been drowning financially, yet he'd never said a word. He'd maintained his dignity and independence until the very end. And now whatever secret waited in that garage might be the key to understanding why. As twilight settled over Millfield, Eleanor stood before the garage door, key in hand. The padlocks, 3 of them, had kept this space sealed for as long as she could remember. With each lock that fell open, her heart beat faster until finally the door swung inward with a protesting groan of aged hinges. She fumbled for the light switch, and ancient fluorescent bulbs flickered reluctantly to life, revealing a space frozen in time. The workbench where Thomas had fixed her bicycle still stood against one wall, tools arranged with military precision. Shelves lined another wall, housing parts and manuals. But it was the two massive shapes in the center of the garage, covered with canvas tarps yellowed with age, that demanded attention. Eleanor approached slowly, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the canvas covering the first shape. The fabric was stiff with decades of dust and stillness. With a deep breath, she grasped the edge and pulled. Dust billowed around her, dancing in the harsh fluorescent light, momentarily obscuring her vision. As it settled, Eleanor found herself face to face with automotive perfection, a pristine white Lamborghini Countach, its angular lines and dramatic styling unmistakable even to her untrained eye. The breath left her body. She circled the vehicle slowly, taking in every detail of the supercar that had adorned countless teenage boys' bedroom walls in the 1980s. The vehicle looked as though it had been preserved in amber, untouched by time. Her hands shaking more violently now, Eleanor moved to the second shape. This tarp came away more easily, revealing a car that made even the Lamborghini seem commonplace. A Ferrari 250 GTO, its sensuous red curves the pinnacle of automotive design and engineering. Even with her limited knowledge of cars, Eleanor recognized this as something extraordinary, something priceless. As she stood frozen between the two vehicles, her phone rang again. Robert's name flashed on the screen, his text message brief and cold. "Arriving tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the lawyer. Don't make this difficult." Eleanor looked from the phone to the cars and back again, the full weight of her grandfather's secret legacy finally dawning on her. Thomas Morgan had not been a simple, failed old man as Robert believed. He had been a keeper of treasures, a guardian of history, and now that mantle had passed to her. Morning light filtered through the garage's grimy windows, casting the two uncovered supercars in an almost ethereal glow. Eleanor had spent half the night researching, her laptop balanced on her knees as she sat in Thomas's recliner, searching for information about these specific models. What she discovered left her breathless. The Ferrari 250 GTO was one of just 36 ever built. Recent auction prices hovered around $70 million for each car. The Lamborghini Countach, while not quite as rare, was still worth well over $1 million in its pristine condition. Thomas hadn't just left her old cars. He had left her a fortune that could change lives. But with this knowledge came questions that multiplied by the hour. How had her grandfather, a man who lived modestly and struggled to pay his mortgage, come to possess two of the most valuable cars in the world? Why had he kept them hidden, locked away from everyone, including his family? And why had he chosen to reveal them only after his death? Eleanor returned to the garage early, drawn by an urgency she couldn't explain. This time, she noticed details that had escaped her in the shock of her initial discovery. A metal filing cabinet in the corner, a poster of the Ferrari factory in Maranello hanging slightly askew on the wall, revealing the edge of a safe behind it. The combination Thomas had left, 546871, opened the safe with a satisfying click. Inside, she found several leather portfolios, a small stack of photographs, and a velvet pouch containing a heavy gold ring with the Ferrari emblem. The first portfolio contained ownership papers for both vehicles, documenting that Thomas Morgan had indeed legally purchased them, the Ferrari in 1971 and the Lamborghini in 1985. The second held something even more remarkable: detailed technical drawings in her grandfather's precise hand, designs for engine components labeled with the Ferrari and Lamborghini logos. Eleanor spread the photographs across the workbench. Color had faded to sepia tones, but the images remained clear. A younger Thomas standing beside Enzo Ferrari himself, both men smiling at the camera. Thomas in coveralls at what appeared to be a racetrack, bent over an exposed engine. Thomas receiving an award, the plaque reading, "For Outstanding Innovation in Automotive Engineering." "Who were you?" Eleanor whispered to the empty garage. The filing cabinet yielded even more secrets. Newspaper clippings from Italian and American automotive magazines featured interviews with a Thomas Morgan, lead engineer at Ferrari, in the late 1960s. Letters on Ferrari and Lamborghini letterhead detailed projects and praised Thomas's contributions to revolutionary engine designs. One folder, labeled simply Dispute, contained legal documents and heated correspondence between Thomas and executives at Ferrari, culminating in a settlement agreement dated 1972. The language was dense with legal terms, but the essence was clear. Thomas had developed a groundbreaking engine technology that the company had claimed as their own. The settlement granted him ownership of one vehicle and a modest financial compensation in exchange for his silence. Eleanor sat on the dusty garage floor, surrounded by the evidence of a life her grandfather had hidden from everyone. The brilliant engineer, the respected innovator, the man who had shaped an industry, how different from the quiet, modest grandfather who had fixed bicycles and built birdhouses in his retirement. A knock at the garage door startled her from her thoughts. She quickly gathered the documents, stuffing them back into the safe before answering. Martha, her colleague from the nursing home, stood on the other side. At 65, Martha had been a friend and mentor to Eleanor for years, her silver hair always perfectly coiffed despite the demands of their job. "You didn't show up for your shift," Martha said, concern etching lines around her eyes. "I called your apartment, then figured you'd be here." "I'm sorry, I completely lost track of time." Eleanor gestured vaguely behind her, careful to block Martha's view of the garage interior. Martha peered past her anyway, her eyes widening as she caught a glimpse of red metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Eleanor Morgan, what on earth is that?" There was no hiding it now. Eleanor stepped aside, allowing Martha to enter. The older woman's gasp echoed through the garage as she took in the two supercars. "Your grandfather had these? All this time?" Eleanor nodded, overwhelmed by the need to share this burden with someone. "I just found out last night. There's more." She gestured to the documents she'd been examining. "He wasn't just a retired mechanic, Martha. He was an engineer for Ferrari. He designed engines that changed the industry." Martha circled the Ferrari slowly, her expression shifting from shock to something more knowing. "You know, he used to come into Denny's every Tuesday, when I waited tables there before I went into nursing. He'd sit for hours with his coffee, sketching on napkins. I always thought he was just doodling." "Did he ever talk about his past?" "Not directly, but once after too many refills. He mentioned working in Italy during the 60s. Said it was the happiest time of his life until he met your grandmother." Martha turned to face Eleanor. "He also said the worst mistake a man can make is letting other people define his worth." Eleanor thought about Robert, about the dismissive way he'd always spoken of their grandfather. "My brother is coming at 10 with his lawyer. He wants to sell the house to cover Grandpa's debts." "Does he know about—" Martha gestured to the cars. "No, and I'm not sure I want him to, at least not yet." Martha placed a weathered hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Then you'd better decide quickly what you're going to do, because these cars change everything." After Martha left, Eleanor returned to the safe, pulling out the remaining documents. Among them was an unsealed envelope with Robert's name on it. She hesitated only briefly before opening it. "Robert, you always wanted proof that I amounted to something. Perhaps these will convince you that success isn't measured by the loudness of one's achievements, but by the impact of one's work, however silent it may be. I kept these cars not for their monetary value, but as reminders of a time when my ideas changed how people thought about engineering. I could have sold them years ago and lived comfortably, but some treasures are worth more than money." I hope someday you'll understand that true worth isn't found in bank accounts or titles. Your loving grandfather, Thomas. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, returning it to its envelope. She understood now why Thomas had instructed her to open the garage first, before sharing with Robert. Her brother would see only dollar signs, not the profound statement about values that Thomas had preserved all these years. The sound of tires on gravel announced visitors. Eleanor peered through the garage window to see Robert's Lexus pulling into the driveway, followed by a sedan she didn't recognize. Her time for contemplation had run out. She hurried to lock the garage, securing each padlock before slipping the key into her pocket. By the time she rounded the house to the front porch, Robert was already ascending the steps, a tall man in an expensive suit following close behind. At 57, Robert Morgan carried himself with the confident air of someone accustomed to being in charge. His gray-streaked hair was impeccably styled, his clothing tailored to disguise the slight paunch of middle age. The years had hardened his features, making him look more like their father than the brother she'd grown up with. Eleanor, his greeting was cool, professional. This is Martin Caldwell, my attorney. He's here to help us inventory the property and prepare for the estate sale. Eleanor nodded to the lawyer, but addressed her brother. We need to talk first, alone. Robert glanced at his watch with poorly disguised impatience. Fine, 10 minutes. Inside, the house felt smaller with Robert's presence filling it. He stood in the living room, refusing Eleanor's offer to sit, his eyes cataloging each piece of furniture as if assessing its auction value. The bank is foreclosing, Eleanor said. Deciding directness was her best approach. Did you know Grandpa was 3 months behind on his mortgage? I suspected as much. He was too proud to ask for help. Robert ran a finger along a bookshelf, checking for dust. All the more reason to liquidate quickly. This property is a liability, not an asset. What if there's more to Grandpa's estate than you think? Robert's laugh held no humor. Eleanor, be realistic. Dad lived in this outdated house, drove a 20-year-old pickup truck, and wore the same cardigan for a decade. There's nothing of value here except the land the house sits on. You're wrong. The words escaped before Eleanor could reconsider. There's something you need to see. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Robert's face. What are you talking about? Eleanor hesitated, Thomas's warning echoing in her mind. Don't share this with Robert until you understand the full story. But wasn't that exactly what she'd spent the night doing? Learning about Thomas's past, his achievements, his silent pride? Follow me, she said, already moving toward the back door. Robert trailed behind her, his irritation growing with each step. Eleanor, I don't have time for... His words died as Eleanor unlocked the garage door and pushed it open. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the two automotive masterpieces in all their glory. Robert froze on the threshold, his mouth falling open. What the hell is this? Eleanor watched the calculations happening behind her brother's eyes. The immediate recognition of value, the shock, the reassessment of everything he thought he knew about their grandfather. Grandpa was an automotive engineer, Eleanor explained, her voice steady. He worked for Ferrari and Lamborghini in the 1960s and early 70s. These cars were part of his compensation. Robert approached the Ferrari with an outstretched hand, stopping just short of touching its gleaming surface. This is a 250 GTO. Do you have any idea what this is worth? About $70 million, Eleanor said quietly, and the Lamborghini is worth another million or two. Robert turned to her, his face transformed by disbelief. That's not possible. Dad would have told us. He wouldn't have lived like this if he had this kind of asset. There's more. Eleanor moved to the safe, removing the documents she discovered. He designed engines for them, revolutionary ones. There was a dispute over patents. The Ferrari was part of his settlement. Robert sank onto a nearby stool, the documents trembling in his hands as he scanned them. All these years, he let us think he was just a small-town mechanic. Why would he hide this? I think that's explained here. Eleanor handed him the letter addressed to him. As Robert read, his expression shifted through a kaleidoscope of emotions: defensiveness, anger, confusion, and finally something like shame. When he looked up, his eyes were rimmed with red. "He thought I was ashamed of him," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Weren't you?" Eleanor's question held no accusation, only a quiet truth they both recognized. Before Robert could answer, a sharp knock rattled the garage door. The lawyer's voice called through, "Mr. Morgan, is everything all right?" Robert cleared his throat. "Give us a minute, Martin." He turned back to Eleanor. "What do you want to do about this?" It was the first time in years Robert had asked for her opinion on anything important. Eleanor looked around the garage, at the treasures their grandfather had preserved and the legacy he'd protected. "I think we should honor his wishes," she said. "The cars aren't just assets. They're his statement about what really matters. But the house, the foreclosure, we could sell one car," Eleanor suggested. "Pay off the house, set up a proper fund for its upkeep. Use the rest to establish a scholarship in his name for engineering students." "And the other car?" Eleanor smiled, an idea forming. "I think Grandpa would want that one preserved, where people could appreciate the craftsmanship. There's a transportation museum in Boston that would probably be honored to display it, with Thomas Morgan's name prominently featured, of course." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the cars to the photographs to his sister's face. "He left a different letter for you, didn't he? What did it say?" "That I was the only one who really saw him," Eleanor answered honestly. "But I think he was wrong about that. I just saw different parts of him than you did." Robert nodded slowly, a hint of the brother she'd once known emerging from behind the businessman's mask. "You know, when I was about 10, he took me to a car show in Boston. There was a Ferrari there. Not like this one, a newer model. He stood in front of it for almost an hour, just staring. I was bored out of my mind." A small laugh escaped him. "He said something I never forgot. Robbie, sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones no one else recognizes." I thought he was just making excuses for not being able to afford nice things. Eleanor moved to stand beside her brother, both of them facing the Ferrari that represented so much more than its monetary value. "He wasn't just talking about cars." "No," Robert agreed. "I see that now." 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the atrium of the New England Transportation Museum, watching as workers carefully positioned the Ferrari 250 GTO on a raised platform. Spotlights highlighted the car's sensuous curves, making the red paint glow like living fire. Behind it, a large photograph of Thomas Morgan in his younger days had been enlarged and mounted, his easy smile and intelligent eyes gazing out at visitors. The Lamborghini had sold at auction for just under $2 million, enough to pay off the mortgage with plenty left to establish the Thomas Morgan Scholarship for Innovative Engineering at MIT. The house remained in the family, with plans to convert part of it into a small private museum, showcasing Thomas's designs and contributions to automotive history. Robert stood at her side, his usual tailored suit replaced by more casual attire. The past months had softened some of the hard edges between them, as they worked together to uncover and preserve their grandfather's legacy. The museum director called it the find of the decade, Robert said, pride evident in his voice. Apparently, automotive historians have been searching for this particular GTO for years. It was thought to be lost. Not lost, Eleanor corrected gently. Just waiting for the right time to be found. The grand opening was scheduled for the following weekend, with automotive enthusiasts and journalists coming from around the world to see the legendary vehicle and learn about the man who had owned it. The story had already made headlines in specialized publications. Hidden treasure, the Ferrari engineer who disappeared. Eleanor felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to find Martha, elegant in a blue dress she'd clearly purchased for the occasion. He would have hated all this attention, Martha said, gesturing toward the growing display. Maybe, Eleanor agreed, but I think he'd appreciate that people are finally recognizing his work, not just the cars. As they watched, museum staff carefully positioned a glass display case containing Thomas's technical drawings, patents, and photographs from his time in Italy. Each item told part of a story that had remained hidden for decades. The brilliant mind, the passionate innovator, the man who had valued integrity over recognition. I've been thinking about something, Robert said suddenly. What if we established a restoration program? Use part of the house as a workshop where young mechanics could learn to work on classic cars. Eleanor looked at her brother in surprise. It was the first time he'd suggested anything that didn't involve financial calculations. Grandpa would have loved that. I know. Robert smiled, a genuine expression that reminded Eleanor of the boy he'd once been. He was always happiest when he was teaching someone how to build or fix something. Later that afternoon, as the museum staff finished their preparations, Eleanor found herself alone with the Ferrari. She ran her hand lightly over its fender, feeling the connection to the man who had treasured it for so long. Ms. Morgan? She turned to see a middle-aged man approaching, his Italian accent unmistakable. I'm Antonio Bianchi from the Ferrari Heritage Department, he introduced himself. I've been researching your grandfather's work since the news broke about this car. Eleanor shook his hand. It's nice to meet you. I wanted to personally deliver this. He handed her an envelope bearing the Ferrari emblem. Our current CEO was quite moved by your grandfather's story. The company would like to formally acknowledge Thomas Morgan's contributions to our engineering legacy. Inside the envelope was an invitation to Maranello, Italy, Ferrari's headquarters, for a special ceremony honoring Thomas's work. More significantly, there was documentation acknowledging his role in developing 3 key engine technologies that had become standard in high-performance vehicles. We've also discovered something interesting, Antonio continued. Your grandfather filed several patents under a slightly different name, Thomas M. Gallo, in the mid-1970s. Patents that are still in use today in generating significant licensing revenue. Eleanor felt her breath catch. What are you saying? I'm saying, Ms. Morgan, that there's a substantial amount of money that rightfully belongs to your grandfather's estate, and beyond that, there's a legacy of innovation that deserves proper recognition. That evening, Eleanor sat on the porch swing of her grandfather's house. Her house now, she reminded herself, watching as twilight settled over the familiar neighborhood. The garage stood open, empty now of its treasures, but still filled with memories. Her phone rang. It was Robert. Did you hear from Ferrari? He asked without preamble. Yes, it's overwhelming. I just got off the phone with my patent attorney. Robert's voice held an excitement she hadn't heard in years. Eleanor, the royalties from Grandpa's patents could be worth millions. He created a trust for them under that Gallo pseudonym. It's been accumulating for decades. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the magnitude of it all wash over her. Not just the money, but the recognition, the vindication of a man who had lived with quiet dignity while the world overlooked his genius. You know what this means, Robert continued. Every major car manufacturer has been using his technology. He changed the industry from the shadows. He always said the measure of a person isn't what they own. Eleanor replied softly, it's what they give away. The following spring, Eleanor stood at Thomas's graveside, placing fresh flowers against the new headstone. The simple granite marker now bore an additional inscription: Engineer, Innovator, Creator of Legacy. Robert joined her, kneeling to arrange his own bouquet. The first Thomas Morgan scholars start at MIT this fall, he said. 5 of them, all from backgrounds like ours. Small towns, ordinary families. He would have liked that. Eleanor smiled, imagining her grandfather's quiet approval. As they walked back to the car, Robert paused. You know, I've been thinking about something he wrote in that letter. About success not being measured by the loudness of one's achievements. What about it? I think I've been living my whole life trying to make enough noise to drown out my own doubts. My big house, my fancy car, my important job, they were all just ways of proving something. Eleanor waited, giving her brother space to continue. Grandpa had nothing to prove, Robert said finally. He knew his worth, even when no one else recognized it. The museum had become a popular attraction, with visitors coming specifically to see the Morgan Ferrari and learn about the engineer who had quietly shaped automotive history. The restoration workshop at Thomas's house was taking its first students, teaching them not just mechanics but the philosophy Thomas had embodied. That craftsmanship was its own reward. Eleanor often found herself in the garage during quiet evenings, sitting at her grandfather's workbench, feeling his presence in the tools he'd left behind. She discovered a hidden drawer containing a journal, Thomas's private thoughts about engineering, innovation, and life, spanning decades. Each entry revealed another facet of the man she loved, but never fully understood until now. One entry, dated shortly after his retirement, stood out. People keep asking why I don't sell the cars, especially now that their value has increased beyond what anyone could have imagined. They don't understand that some treasures aren't meant to be converted to cash. Some treasures are reminders of who we are and what we've contributed to the world. Eleanor understands this, I think. She sees value in things others overlook, including me. Perhaps someday she'll be the one to decide these cars' fate when I'm gone. And whatever she chooses, I know it will honor not just their monetary worth, but their meaning. Standing in the museum months later, watching families marvel at the Ferrari and read about Thomas's innovations, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness. Her grandfather's legacy wasn't just in the millions of dollars from patents or the valuable cars he'd hidden away. It was in the quiet dignity with which he lived his life, the recognition he hadn't sought but had always deserved, the lesson he taught her about measuring worth not in possessions or accolades, but in integrity and purpose. As visitors gathered for the official dedication of the Thomas Morgan Innovation Center, Eleanor caught Robert's eye across the room. Her brother nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they'd taken together, uncovering treasures far more valuable than the ones they'd found beneath dusty canvas covers in an old man's garage. The true treasure, Eleanor realized, wasn't what they had found. It was what had found them. The understanding that sometimes the most extraordinary lives are lived in the quietest ways, and true legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in impact and in love. Sometimes, she whispered to herself, echoing Thomas's words, the most valuable things in life are the ones no one else recognizes. And in that moment, surrounded by the tangible proof of her grandfather's remarkable life, Eleanor knew she had been given the greatest treasure of all. Not just his legacy, but the wisdom to recognize its true worth.